They told her the blood was a curse. They lied. Every wolf who ever hunted her, every alpha who ever called her weak, every voice that ever told her to keep herself small and sealed and silent. They lied. Because what was living inside her was not a curse. It was a key. And on one cold October night, the most powerful alpha king in 300 years drove his claws into her shoulder and unlocked everything. Here is what he saw when the blood came out. It was not red. It was black. Black like the sky between stars. Black like the moment before the world was made. Black like something that existed before wolves were given teeth and told to rule. And it was smoking. The Alpha King, a man who had watched kingdoms burn and never once stepped back, took one look at what was pouring from her shoulder and stepped back. He stepped back. And then he dropped to one knee. Because what she had been hiding inside her body for 17 years was not a weakness. It was not a secret. It was not even a power. It was a door. And something ancient and enormous and patient beyond all human understanding had been leaning against that door from the other side for 300 years. Waiting. Waiting for exactly this night. Waiting for exactly this girl. Waiting for the moment she finally stopped being afraid. Now here is what nobody tells you about this story. The Alpha King did not save her. She saved him. When the enemies who had spent 3 centuries building their empire on a lie sent their most powerful weapon to destroy him on that ridge. When the frost spread under his hands and the Alpha King knelt in the dark and the cold moved toward his heart, she put her hand on his back. And she opened the door. And what came through that door did not just save one man on one ridge on one October night. It collapsed an entire empire. With a truth. Because that is what her blood carried. Not poison. Not destruction. Not the curse they spent 300 years calling it. Her blood carried the memory of the gods. And the gods remembered everything. Every lie. Every bargain. Every word of the original deal that the Ashen Court had buried under 3 centuries of constructed history. The gods remembered it all. And they came home. Stay for this one. Because this is not a story about a girl who discovers she is powerful. This is a story about a girl who was always powerful. And a world that needed her to believe otherwise to survive. That world ends tonight. And the ending will leave you breathless. The Alpha King's claws were buried 3 inches into my shoulder before he realized something was wrong. Not with me. With him. His golden eyes, the kind that had watched entire packs burn, dropped to where his hand met my flesh, and for the first time in 300 years, Kale Dravos looked afraid. The blood running down my arm was not red. It was black. Not the black of infection or poison or rot. It was the black of the sky between stars, the kind of darkness that exists before anything is named, before anything is made, before gods decide the world deserves light. And it was smoking. Thin threads of dark vapor curled upward from the wound like incense burning in an old temple, sweet and ancient and deeply, catastrophically wrong. He yanked his hand back. The sound his claws made leaving my body was wet and sharp, like green wood splitting in winter. I did not scream. That was the second thing that frightened him. Every girl screams when an Alpha King tears into her shoulder. Every girl collapses. Every girl begs. I tilted my head and looked at him the way you look at something you have been waiting a very long time to finally meet. You should not have done that, I said. My voice came out calm. The forest around us went silent. Not the polite silence of startled birds, but the total, suffocating silence of a world holding its breath. The pine trees, black-barked and enormous, stopped moving. The wind stopped. The freezing mud beneath my boots stopped sucking at my feet. Even the smoke from the pack's burning outpost, 3 miles east, seemed to pause mid-sky. Kale stood 6.5 feet of pure predator. His dark fur receding back into tanned skin as he forced himself into human form, every muscle in his jaw locked with the effort of control. His silver-streaked hair was damp with someone else's blood. His chest was heaving. He smelled of pine smoke and crushed bone and the metallic burn of adrenaline, and beneath all of that, something new. Something his body had not produced in centuries. Fear sweat. Real fear. The kind that does not come from danger. The kind that comes from wrongness. "What are you?" he said. Not demanded. The Alpha King, who had never asked for anything in his entire existence, was simply and quietly asking. I pressed 2 fingers against my own wound. My black blood coated them like oil. Warm, impossibly warm, warmer than fire, warmer than the inside of a living thing. And I held my fingers up so he could see them clearly in the moonlight. The smoke intensified. Where my blood hit the cold October air, it did not drip. Rose. "My name is Sarah Voss," I said. "My mother was human. My father was something older than wolves. And your claws just opened the seal." He took 1 step back. I had never seen an Alpha King take a step back from anything. The ground beneath my feet began to hum, low and resonant, the way old stone hums when it remembers it was once a mountain. I felt it in my teeth, in the hollows behind my eyes, in the place behind my sternum where ordinary girls keep their fear, and I had instead kept this waiting, this coiled and patient darkness, for 17 years. The wound in my shoulder was not closing. It was opening. Not wider, but deeper, in a direction that did not correspond to any dimension Kale's predator eyes were built to see. Through the opening, if you looked, and he was looking, he could not stop looking, there was light. Not the gold of his alpha eyes. Not the silver of the moon. Something older. Something that existed before the moon was hung in the sky like a lantern and told to govern wolves and tides and the madness of men. Kale's wolves, 30 of them, massive and gray and battle-hardened, positioned in a kill ring through the trees, began to whine. One by one, they lowered themselves to the frozen ground. Not in submission. In recognition. Their ancient instincts, buried under centuries of alpha conditioning and pack hierarchy and the politics of blood dominance, remembered something their minds had forgotten. They recognized what I was. They were afraid in the way all creatures are afraid of the thing that existed before them. "Call them off," I said to Kale, though it did not matter anymore whether he did or not. "Or do not. They will not move against me either way." He looked at his wolves prostrate in the frozen mud, their enormous bodies flattened, their breath coming in fast white clouds, and the last piece of his certainty cracked open like a frozen river in March, slow and tremendous and irreversible. "What have I done?" he said. He was not speaking to me. He was speaking to the night, to whatever force had arranged this moment. Had arranged him, arrogant and ancient and supremely confident in his own power, to drive his claws into the one girl on earth whose blood he should have feared more than silver, more than fire, more than God. "You freed me," I said. The black smoke poured from my shoulder in earnest now, spreading along the ground like fog with intention, curling around the roots of the pine trees, climbing the bark, moving toward his wolves and then past them, moving outward in every direction through the dark forest. Somewhere far away, something enormous woke up. It had no lungs, but I heard it breathe. It had no name that human tongues could hold, but I knew it the way a key knows a lock. Kel felt it too. Every wolf feels the presence of a god, even if they do not understand what they are feeling. It lands in the sternum like a blow. It strips the arrogance out of a body the way cold water strips warmth. He staggered. He, the Alpha King, staggered. "Sarah," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a confession. I walked toward him. The mud did not suck at my boots anymore. I was not touching the ground anymore. "My blood is a curse to wolves," I told him, close enough now that the black smoke from my wound wrapped around his wrists like rope, like prayer, like judgment. Every wolf who spills it loses something they can never name and never recover. Their certainty. Their dominance. The part of them that believes they are the top of the hierarchy. His golden eyes were wide. They were searching my face for mercy and finding something far more terrifying. Not cruelty, not rage, but peace. The absolute peace of a girl who had spent 17 years waiting for exactly this moment. But to the gods, I said, my blood is a door. And you, Alpha King, just knocked. The forest exhaled. The thing with no lungs breathed again. Closer now, interested now. Drawn by the smoke of my opened blood like a wolf drawn to the smell of meat. Kale dropped to one knee. Not because I had hurt him. Not because his body had given out. But because something in the universe had silently and irrevocably rearranged itself. And standing in my presence now felt like standing inside a temple, like standing at the edge of something that went down forever. And every animal instinct he had ever possessed was screaming at him to make himself small. Look down at the Alpha King. 300 years old. Ruthless and beautiful and terribly, catastrophically mortal. The question, I said softly, is whether the gods who are coming through are going to see you as an obstacle. The smoke covered the forest floor in every direction as far as either of us could see. The pine trees groaned under the weight of something invisible pressing through them. The stars above began to go out, one by one, like candles in a room where something very old is walking toward the door. Kale Dravos, Alpha King, tilted his face up to mine in the dark. And for the first time in 300 years, he said the only word left available to him. I had never heard Kale Dravos say that word before. No one had. There were wolves in his pack who had lived 2 centuries, who had fought beside him through wars that rewrote the borders of the supernatural world, who had watched him execute kings and dismantle dynasties with the same expression he wore when he was bored. Not one of them had ever heard him say please. It landed in the cold air between us like something dropped from a great height. Heavy. Irretrievable. The smoke from my wound continued to pour outward through the forest, curling around the roots of ancient pines, moving with the slow and terrible patience of something that had waited longer than civilizations. I looked at him for a long moment. His golden eyes were still wide, still searching my face, still processing the catastrophic reordering of everything he had believed about power and hierarchy and his own position at the top of it. His dark hair was stuck to his forehead with cold sweat. His jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He was still on one knee in the frozen mud. Alpha King. On one knee. In the mud. Please, he said again, and this time the word was quieter, more deliberate, as if he had decided that if he was going to say it, he was going to mean it with every part of his ancient predatory soul. Please tell me what is coming through. I considered the question. Beneath my feet, or rather beneath the 6 inches of air between my feet and the mud, the ground was vibrating with a frequency I felt in my back teeth, in the thin bones of my inner ear, in the cavity behind my sternum where the darkness had lived for 17 years without ever once asking permission. I do not know their names, I said. Not yet. Names come later, when they have fully crossed. Right now they are just intention. Just hunger. Just the memory of a world that existed before wolves were made to run in it. Kale absorbed this. His nostrils flared as he processed the layers of scent in the air. The smoke from my blood, the approaching presence that had no body and therefore no smell except the absence of all familiar things, the freezing mud, the distant burn of his pack's outposts still smoldering 3 miles east. Will they destroy the pack? He asked. The question surprised me. Not because he asked it but because of how he asked it. Not strategically. Not as a calculation of acceptable losses or defensible positions. He asked it the way a person asks about something they love. Raw and unguarded and entirely unaware of how much it revealed. I filed that away somewhere quiet in the back of my mind. That depends, I said, On what you do in the next few minutes. He stood. The motion was careful and controlled, but I noticed he rose slowly, which was not a thing Kale Dravos ever did. He rose slowly because his body was telling him, screaming at him in the language of every animal instinct he possessed, not to make any sudden movements in my vicinity. Not anymore. He was now over 6 feet of apex predator, operating entirely on the understanding that he was no longer the most dangerous thing in this forest. Possibly not even the second most dangerous. He stood and he looked at me and he said, "What do you need from me?" And that was the moment I understood that I had not just broken something in Kale Dravos tonight. I had built something. Something neither of us had asked for and neither of us knew the shape of yet. "I need your wolves to stay down," I said. "The ones in the trees. Their aggression is pulling at the boundary. Every surge of dominance energy from an alpha-blooded wolf makes the crossing faster, harder, less controlled. The gods that come through gently can be reasoned with. The ones that come through a torn opening arrive angry." He turned his head slightly, not breaking eye contact with me, and made a sound low in his chest. It was not a word. It was something beneath words, something that lived in the layer of communication that existed before language was invented, a sound that traveled through the pack bond like current through wire and said, "Be still, be small, be nothing, do not breathe wrong." In the trees, 30 massive wolves pressed themselves harder into the frozen mud. Several of them whimpered. The sound was extraordinary. Wolves of that size, that age, that blood did not whimper. The forest settled fractionally. The vibration beneath me eased from a roar to a hum. The stars that had been going out paused in their extinguishing, as though whatever was on the other side had been given a reason to slow down. I pressed my hand to my shoulder wound. The black blood coated my palm fully, warm and impossible, and I could feel the pulse of it. Not my heartbeat, but something older, something that used my heartbeat the way a river uses a channel, something flowing through me rather than from me. "There is a way to close the door," I said. "Partially. Not all the way. Your claws already changed things, and things that are changed cannot always be unchanged. But the threshold can be narrowed. The gods on the other side can be given a reason to wait rather than push." "What reason?" Kale asked. "An offering," I said. "Not blood. They have enough blood. Something rarer." His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What is rarer than blood to ancient gods?" "Intention," I said. "Genuine, witnessed, spoken aloud intention. A promise made by something powerful enough that breaking it would have consequences." He stared at me. I watched him arrive at the understanding I had been steering him toward. I watched him not like it. I watched him accept it anyway. "You need me to make a promise," he said. "To them. Now. Out loud." "Yes." "What kind of promise?" "To protect me," I said. "To ensure I am not harmed again. To guarantee that my blood is not spilled by wolf claws or wolf teeth or wolf intent until the gods on the other side have decided what they want to do with the door your aggression helped open." The muscle in his jaw jumped again. "You want the Alpha King to swear himself as your guardian," he said. "To beings I cannot see. To beings that have been asleep since before my bloodline existed." "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what I want. And if I refuse?" I looked at him quietly. Behind me, though I did not turn to look, the smoke thickened. The humming in the ground intensified. One of the wolves in the trees let out a sound that was not a whimper this time. It was a keen, high and terrible, the sound of an animal whose instincts have just presented it with something so far outside the known hierarchy of the world that it has no category for the feeling. Kale held my gaze for 4 full seconds. For seconds was a very long time for an alpha. Then he turned his face upward, toward the dark sky where the stars had paused their disappearing, and he said, in a voice that was quiet and absolute and rang through the forest like a struck bell, "I, Kale Dravos, Alpha King of the Dravosi bloodline, do swear before whatever listens that this girl will not be harmed by my hand, my pack, my word, or my will, for as long as the old ones require it. This is my intention, witnessed and given freely." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. And then, from below and above and from the direction that was neither, there was something that might have been, in some distant translated sense, acknowledgement. The smoke began very slowly to thin. The stars reappeared one by one. The ground's vibration settled into something deep and background, present but no longer urgent, like a heartbeat you forget about until you remember it again. The wound in my shoulder began, not to heal, but to quiet. The black blood slowed its smoking. The door narrowed. Did not close, but narrowed. I lowered my feet to the mud. It was cold enough to feel through the soles of my boots, freezing and wet, and the sudden ordinariness of it, the physical, earthly discomfort of standing in mud in October, hit me like a wave. My legs shook slightly. Only slightly. I did not let it show beyond that. Kel saw it anyway. Of course he did. He was 300 years old and his primary skill set involved reading bodies. He did not say anything about it. He simply moved to stand at my left side. Not behind me, not in front of me, but beside me, which was its own kind of statement, and said quietly, "We need to move. The outpost fire will bring eyes. Not just mine." I turned to look at him. Up close, in the diminished smoke, he was less mythological and more real. Exhausted in the way old things get exhausted, not physically but in the deeper sense, the wearing down of something that has been hard for a very long time. "Whose eyes?" Yes. And that was when I heard them. Not with my ears first. With my blood. The black fluid still coating my palm went cold. Not the cold of temperature, but the cold of wrongness, of recognition, of a warning system that operated on a frequency older than wolves or gods or anything in between. My blood recognized something in the approaching dark. And whatever it recognized, it did not like. "Kale," I said. He had already smelled them. I watched his entire body change. Not shift, but change, the way a weapon changes when someone picks it up with intent, the casual ease of him evaporating and something older and harder taking its place. "The Valdrin pack," he said, and his voice had dropped into a register that was barely human. 15, maybe 20. Moving fast from the northeast. They have been tracking the smoke. He turned to look at me, and the calculation in his eyes was not cold, which would have been easier. It was complicated, layered, something wrestling with something else behind the gold. "They will have seen the light from the blood," he said. "The black smoke from a shoulder wound on a girl who is not shifting and not dead is not something they will ignore. How much do they know about what I am?" Yes. "Nothing," he said. 3 hours ago, no one knew anything. But the Valdrin Alpha, Marin, she is old. Older than most give her credit for. If she sees your blood, she will know it is not ordinary. And Marin's relationship with ordinary information is that she sells it to whoever pays the most. The cold in my palm intensified. In the trees, Kale's wolves were still down, still pressed to the mud, and I could feel the tension radiating from them. The pack bond pulling them toward their alpha, toward the threat, toward every instinct that told them to rise and form and fight. But they held. Because he had told them to hold. Because somehow, in the last 10 minutes, the Alpha King had decided that my instruction was worth enforcing even at the cost of his own pack's pride. I did not have time to examine what that meant. The Valdrin wolves hit the tree line. They came in human form, which was almost more frightening. A deliberate choice, a statement that said we are controlled, we are intentional, we are here to see and not yet to fight. 15 of them, moving through the pines in a loose formation that was almost casual and entirely predatory, their breath making white clouds in the frozen air. At their front walked a woman who looked about 35 and was probably closer to 200. Marin Voldrin. She was not tall. That was the first thing. You expected tall from her reputation, from the weight of stories that circulated about the Voldrin Alpha. And instead she was compact and dark-eyed and wore a long coat the color of dried blood and moved through the frozen forest like the forest had been arranged specifically for her comfort. Her eyes went to me first. Not to Kale. Me. Then to my shoulder. Then to the black residue still coating my palm. She stopped 12 feet away, and her dark eyes moved through the thinning smoke with an expression that was professionally neutral and privately electric. "Kale," she said, "you are far from home." "As are you," he said. "The Voldrin territory is 40 miles north." "I was curious," she said. The smoke carried. She was still looking at me. Her nostrils flared minutely. I watched her process the scent of my blood. Watched the neutrality of her expression do something complicated and careful. Watched her file information away with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been trading in secrets for a very long time. "Who is the girl?" she said. "No one you need to know," Kale said. "She is under my protection." Marin's eyes moved to him at that. Something shifted in them. Not surprise exactly, but the cousin of surprise. The recalibration of someone who had walked into a room expecting to find one kind of situation and found something else entirely. "Your protection," she said. Not a question. Notation. She was cataloging. "Since when does the Alpha King extend personal protection to human girls in the middle of occupied territory?" "Since now," Kale said. "The terms of that protection are not your business." Marin smiled. It was a very particular kind of smile, the kind built by centuries of navigating rooms full of people who were trying to kill her or use her or both, a smile that contained absolutely no warmth and enormous competence. "She is not human," Marin said. Simply. Observationally. As if she were noting the weather. Kale said nothing. Which was, of course, a kind of answer. Marin took one step forward. Just one. Kale's hand moved. Not toward Marin, but slightly outward at his side, at the edge of my peripheral vision. A half gesture. Question. I recognized it. He was asking silently whether I wanted him to stop her. The fact that he asked rather than acted sent something small and unexpected through my chest. I gave the smallest shake of my head. He stilled. Marin took her one step and stopped and looked at me with those 200-year-old eyes and said, "What is your name?" "Sarah," I said. "Voss," she said immediately. Not a guess. A retrieval. She had heard of me. The cold in my blood went colder. "Katla Voss's daughter," Marin said, and something moved through her expression that I could not fully read. Something that was not quite fear and not quite recognition but lived in the neighborhood of both. "Your mother came to me once. 12 years ago. She wanted to know if I had a record of the bloodline. The old one. The one that predates pack records." My throat tightened. I had not known that. My mother had told me very little before she died. Had pressed the knowledge she had into me in fragments, in hushed sentences, in the space between sleep and waking when I was too young to ask the right questions and she was too frightened to give the right answers. She had not told me she had gone to Marin Voldrin. She had not told me someone else knew. "What did you tell her?" said. My voice came out steady. I was proud of that. "I told her what I am telling you now," Marin said. "That the bloodline she was asking about is not in any pack record, because it predates packs. It predates wolves. It belongs to a category of lineage that most of the supernatural world has spent several thousand years pretending does not exist, because the alternative, acknowledging it, requires acknowledging what it means." He paused. Her eyes dropped briefly to my shoulder, to the dried black smoke residue, to the wound that had stopped bleeding but had not closed. What it means, she continued more quietly, is that the gods are not gone. They are just waiting for the right blood to open the right door. The pine trees creaked overhead. A cold wind moved through them suddenly, purposeful and sharp, carrying the smell of pine resin and ice and something beneath both of those. Something sweet and dark that had no business being in a cold October forest. Something that smelled the way I imagined old altars smelled, old stone worn smooth by 10,000 hands, incense burned to things that had no faces. Marin inhaled it. Her composure, so thoroughly maintained, cracked by a hairline fracture. "It has already started," she said. And for the first time, the competence in her voice had something underneath it. Not fear. Older than fear. "Oh. The wound was opened 20 minutes ago," I said. "The door is narrowed but not closed." "I know," she said. "I have been feeling it since before I saw the smoke. 40 miles, and I felt the moment the boundary changed. Every wolf with old enough blood felt it." She looked at me steadily. "Which means," she said, "that the Valdrin pack is not the only one moving through these woods tonight." The cold in my blood became a roar. Cale stepped forward. Not in front of me, but fully beside me now, shoulder almost at my shoulder, and his presence at that proximity was overwhelming in a purely physical sense. Heat and mass and 3 centuries of violent competence. And he said to Marin in a voice that was very quiet and very final, "Who else is coming?" Marin looked at him. The calculation was visible now. The rapid interior accounting of risk and leverage and what she had to gain and what she had to lose. "The Ashen Court," she said. The Valdrin wolves behind her shifted. A ripple of something. Not fear but its functional equivalent in predators. A heightening, a readiness, moved through them. Cale's hand closed at his side. I felt, rather than heard, the sound that moved through his chest. "The Ashen Court disbanded 3 centuries ago," he said. "No," Marin said. "They went underground 3 centuries ago. There is a difference. They have been waiting. For this. For a Voss girl to reach the age where the blood activates. For the door to open. They have been waiting considerably longer than you and I have been alive, Cale. And they have spent that time preparing for exactly this night." She turned her eyes back to me. All the commerce had left them. What remained was something earnest and, I realized with a start, something frightened. Marin Valdrin, who sold secrets the way other wolves sold territory, who had survived 2 centuries in the most politically savage corner of the supernatural world, was frightened. Not of me. From me. "The Ashen Court will not want the gods to come through," she said. "They have built their entire power structure on the assumption of divine absence. On the premise that the old ones are gone and will never return, and that therefore the Ashen Court, the ones who made the bargain that drove the gods out, are the rightful inheritors of that power. Your blood," she said, "does not just open a door. Your blood is evidence. Evidence that the bargain was never permanent. Evidence that they lied about the terms. Evidence that everything they have built over 3 centuries is built on a foundation that is currently dissolving." He paused. "They will kill you for that," she said. "Not to stop the gods. To stop the proof." The wind moved through the pines again. Colder this time. Coming from the north. And beneath the smell of pine and ice and the sweet dark residue of my opened blood, something else arrived on it. Something metallic. Something burnt. Something that smelled the way very old, very deliberate, very cold power smells when it has been contained for a long time and is finally, after 300 years, moving toward its purpose. Cale turned his head northeast. His profile in the moonlight was perfectly still. "How far?" "Yes." "Close," he said. closer than they should be. They were already moving before the door opened. They knew, I said. They have always known, Marin said. They have had watchers on Voss bloodline descendants for generations. Waiting for the activation. Waiting for the blood to change. Waiting for exactly the moment that an alpha's aggression would trigger the opening, because they knew, they have always known, that the blood only activates under trauma. She looked at Kale. Something passed between them. Old history, old politics, the complex residue of 2 centuries of surviving in adjacent territories. They used you, she said. They maneuvered you into this territory, into her path, knowing your instinct would be to challenge the unknown presence. Knowing you would put your claws in her. Kale's jaw worked. I watched the understanding move through him. Not just the tactical understanding, but the other kind, the kind that lives in the body, the realization that his hands had been guided tonight by something that had planned 3 centuries for this exact moment. How many in the Ashen Court's field team? He asked Marin. I counted 30 signatures in the pack bond resonance, she said. But the court does not fight with wolves alone. They have practitioners. Blood workers. People who have spent a very long time learning how to do to blood what should not be done to it. My shoulder throbbed. Not painfully. Purposefully. As if the wound, the narrowed door, was reacting to the approaching intent, was sensing what was coming and deciding something about it. I pressed my clean hand to it. Beneath my palm the wound was warm. Warmer than before. Building. Sarah, Kale said, and my name in his mouth had changed since the first time he said it. Had picked up weight, context, something that had not been there 40 minutes ago when I was simply an anomaly in his territory. I looked at him. Tell me what you need, he said. Not what do you want. Not what should we do. What do you need? The specificity of it hit somewhere unexpectedly. I thought about it for 3 full seconds, which was all the time available. The Ashen Court was moving through the forest to my northeast. 30 wolves and an unknown number of bloodworkers. 300 years of preparation converging on a girl with a wound that would not close and a door in her shoulder that something ancient and enormous was leaning against from the other side. Kale had 15 wolves in the trees who were holding themselves on the ground by sheer obedience to their alpha's command, and probably hating every second of it. Marin had 15 wolves behind her whose allegiance belonged to the highest bidder and whose alpha was currently choosing, for reasons she had not fully explained, to stand here and tell me the truth. And I had black blood and a narrowed door and 17 years of training myself not to need anything from anyone. I need higher ground, I said. The ridge north of here, the granite ridge. I need to be above the tree line before they arrive. Why? Kale asked. Because the blood works differently when there is nothing between it and the sky, I said. The gods see me better when I am above the trees. And right now I need them to see me very, very clearly. Marin made a sound that was not quite a laugh. You are going to call them through, she said. Not as a door. As an invitation. Yes, I said. But selectively, I said. There are gods who remember the terms of the old bargain and have grievances. And there are gods who simply remember everything. I need the second kind. The witnesses. The ones with the longest memory. If I can get a witness through the door before the Ashen Court reaches us. They cannot kill what they cannot disprove, Marin said, completing it. A divine witness to the original bargain makes their entire constructed history collapse in real time. Yes, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she turned to her wolves. Northeast formation, she said. You are running interference. Buy the girl time to reach the ridge. Her wolves rose from their casual dispersal into something immediate and organized. The shift in their collective energy hitting the cold air like a physical force. She turned back to me. I want something in return, she said. When this is done, when the witness has spoken and the court's history has collapsed, I want the record. The true record. The one the gods remember. I have spent 200 years working with incomplete information, she said. I want the complete version. I held her gaze. If we survive, I said, you can have it. She nodded once, turned. Her pack dissolved into the trees heading northeast, silent and fast. 15 wolves who moved through frozen forest like they had been born to it, which they had been. Kale's hand closed briefly, lightly, around my wrist. Not restraining. Question. I turned to look at him. His golden eyes in the moonlight were very steady. Can you run? He said, looking at my shoulder. Yes, I said. I am not going to carry you, he said. But I am going to be beside you. And if anything gets close enough to touch you before we reach the ridge. He did not finish it. He did not need to. He nodded. He made the sound in his chest again, the below language one, the current through wire one, and in the trees his wolves rose. All of them. 30 massive bodies coming upright in the darkness, silent and enormous and oriented. He looked at me once more, and in the look was something I did not have a name for yet. Something that had not existed in him an hour ago and had been built by the last 40 minutes out of terror and awe and a promise made to beings he could not see. Ridge, he said. And we ran. The frozen mud hit my boots in rapid percussion. The pine trees blurred past on either side, black-barked and enormous, and overhead the sky. Stars restored, moon enormous and cold, watched us move across the dark floor of the forest. The cold wind from the northeast carried that metallic burning smell, closer now, purposeful now. And beneath my running feet, beneath the frozen mud and the ancient roots, the ground hummed with the steady deep resonance of a door that was narrow but open. And on the other side of it, something patient and enormous and very, very old moved toward the threshold, toward the invitation, toward the blood. We reached the ridge with 4 minutes to spare. I know it was 4 minutes because Kale counted them under his breath the entire way up, a low and steady rhythm, the way soldiers count their own heartbeats when everything else has become too loud to think inside of. The granite ridge was exactly as I remembered it from the one time my mother had brought me here. I had been 6 years old. She had pressed my bare hand to the stone and said, "Remember this," and I had not understood why. Understood now. The granite was warm. Not the warmth of sunlight stored in rock. The warmth of something living inside it, something old and slow and patient. The warmth of a pulse that beats once every 100 years and does not hurry for anyone. I pressed both hands to it when we crested the ridge, and the black blood still coating my palm met the stone, and the stone knew it immediately. The way a lock knows a key. The way a name knows the mouth it was made for. The ridge lit from within. Not brightly. Not dramatically. A deep and amber glow, like the last light inside an ember that has been burning since before anyone was alive to name fire, moving through the veins of granite in slow and deliberate lines, illuminating the minerals inside the rock the way a lantern illuminates the inside of a paper screen. Kale stopped 3 feet behind me. I heard his breath leave him. I heard 30 wolves go silent in the forest below. "Sarah," he said. "I know," I said. "Do not touch the stone." He did not touch the stone. The light continued spreading, moving outward from my handprints in both directions along the ridge, following the natural fault lines and mineral veins, reaching the edges and then going over them, down into the rock face, down into the earth, down toward whatever lived at the center of things that has no name in any language still spoken. Below us, in the forest, the sounds of the Ashen Court's advance reached the tree line. They were not subtle about it anymore. They did not need to be. 30 wolves moving through frozen forest make a sound like distant thunder, like the earth rearranging itself. And behind them the practitioners, the blood workers, made a sound that was worse than that. Silence. Moving silence. The specific absence of sound that follows people who have learned to do things to the fabric of reality that the fabric would prefer not to have done to it. And then Marin's pack hit them. The collision was enormous. Even from the ridge it was enormous. The shattering impact of 15 wolves who had chosen a side and thrown themselves at the calculation with everything they had, the sounds of bodies meeting bodies at full speed, the crack of ice and frozen branch, the chorus of snarls and impacts and the sharp bright sound of pain. Kale's wolves moved to the base of the ridge and formed a line there, shoulder to shoulder in the darkness, a wall of muscle and ancient instinct, and he stood at the top of the ridge above them and watched the tree line with golden eyes that had gone fully luminous. I had perhaps 3 minutes, maybe less. I turned to face the sky. Above the tree line, above the ridge, above everything, the sky was enormous and black and salted with stars, and the moon was so large and so cold and so present that it felt less like a celestial body and more like a witness. I lifted my wounded shoulder. The blood had slowed but not stopped. The smoke had thinned but not ceased. The door was narrow but open. I reached into myself. Not physically, not with my hands, but with whatever lived behind my sternum, the thing that had been coiled there for 17 years, the thing that had kept itself small and quiet and patient while I had grown around it, while I had built a life shaped by the knowledge of what I carried and the terror of what would happen when I stopped being careful. I stopped being careful. Opened it. Not all the way. All the way would have taken the ridge with it. Possibly the forest. Possibly more than the forest. But enough. Enough that the darkness inside me uncoiled like something breathing for the first time, like something stretching limbs it had never used in open air, like a sound that had been trapped in a sealed room for centuries being allowed, finally, to become music. The black blood poured from my shoulder. Not dripped. Poured. It went upward. Against gravity, against every physical law that governs liquid in open air, it went upward in a column of black smoke and dark light, rising from my shoulder into the sky above the ridge, and where it met the cold night air it bloomed into something vast and dark and geometrically incomprehensible, a shape that the human eye processes as beautiful before the human mind has the chance to be afraid of it. The wound opened. The door opened. Fully. And the witness came through. There is no adequate description. I will not pretend there is. Human language was built to describe human experience, and what came through the door in my shoulder on that ridge in October was neither human nor was the experience it produced anything language had been built for. What I can say is this. It was large in the way that concepts are large rather than the way that bodies are large. It had no face in any sense the word face was designed for. It had presence the way a tidal wave has presence. Not merely felt but inhabited, the air around the ridge suddenly thick with it, suddenly reorganized by it, suddenly belonging to something other than the cold October night. And it remembered everything. Every word of every bargain, every term, every lie, every constructed history, every false foundation. 300 years of Ashen Court mythology, held in a being that had witnessed the original moment, the original words, the original deliberate deception, and had been on the other side of the door since then with perfect and total and undiminished recollection. The witness did not speak. It did not need to. Its presence on the ridge was itself a declaration. What it remembered filled the air the way pressure fills a sealed room. Not heard, not seen, but felt in every cell of every living thing within range of it, pressed into bones and instinct and the oldest parts of animal memory that have no language and need none. The Ashen Court practitioners felt it first. I heard it in the forest below. Not words, not sounds, but a cessation. The moving silence of the blood workers stopped moving. Then broke. Then became the sound of people who have spent 300 years building a story and have just felt that story disintegrate in real time, from the foundation outward, from the lie at the center expanding to the lie at the surface, all of it coming apart with the quiet and total finality of a structure that was never sound to begin with. The wolves below the ridge faltered. Marin's pack held. The Ashen Court's wolves did not. They broke in ones and twos and then in groups, the loss of narrative coherence moving through their pack bond like a virus, the thing they had been told they were. Rightful inheritors, divine absence beneficiaries, chosen, dissolving under the weight of a presence that simply, wordlessly, perfectly remembered that it was not true. And then Kale screamed. Not from pain. From impact. It spun. One of the practitioners had not broken. One of them, older than the others, more committed, more desperate, the kind of person who has given too much to a lie to survive the truth of it, had come up the east face of the ridge while the witness held the forest paralyzed. She was gray-haired and small, and her hands were covered in blood that was not hers, worked into sigils that moved on her skin like living things, and she had hit Kale with something that had no physical form but operated on the body as though it did. He was on his knees. The Alpha King was on his knees, and this time it was not reverence. His hands were pressed flat to the granite, and the stone around his hands was darkening, frost spreading outward from each finger as whatever she was running through him drained something essential. Not blood, not warmth, but something beneath those, something the body uses to maintain the basic agreement it has with being alive. She was trying to kill him. Not because he was in her way. Because he had sworn to protect me. Because the oath he had made to the witness was a thread, and she was following the thread back to the source, and the source was me, and she could not reach me directly. The witness prevented that, so she was destroying the oath by destroying the one who swore it. The cold in my blood became a sound. It became a feeling that I did not have a word for because the word had never needed to exist before, had never been necessary until this moment, when I looked at Kale Dravos on his hands and knees on the granite ridge with frost spreading under his palms and understood, with a clarity that had nothing intellectual in it, that lived entirely below thought in the place where true things live, that I was not going to let that happen. Not because he had sworn an oath. Not because I needed him strategically. Not because losing him would compromise anything tactical or political or divine. Because in 40 minutes he had moved from predator to protector, from the hand that tore the wound to the mouth that swore before ancient beings to keep it safe, and that motion, that specific arc, that willingness to be remade by a night neither of us had chosen, was the most extraordinary thing I had ever watched a living thing do. I moved toward him. The practitioner saw me coming. He did not stop. She was beyond stopping. 300 years of investment meeting the moment of its collapse. A person who has nothing left to lose doing the only thing left available to them. I reached Kale before she could complete it. I put my bleeding hand, my black-blooded, smoking, door-opened hand on his back, between his shoulder blades, over his heart. The witness saw what I was doing, felt it see. And it leaned toward us, in the way that vastnesses lean when they have chosen a direction, and it put something of itself behind my hand, behind my blood, behind the intention I was pouring through my palm and into the man kneeling under me. The practitioner's working shattered. Not reversed. Shattered. The sigils on her hands went dark. All of them. Simultaneously. As if something had simply reached into the constructed language of her craft, and removed the agreement that made it function, cancelled the premise, revoked the operating assumption that had underlain 3 centuries of her work. She made a sound that I did not look away from Kale to see. I heard her fall. I did not look. Beneath my hand, Kale's breathing was ragged and enormous, dragging air into a body that had just had something very serious attempted on it. And the frost under his palms was retreating, pulling back from his fingers, the stone returning to its deep amber warmth as the witness continued to pour itself into the space around us. He was alive. He was alive, and the frost was retreating, and his hands on the stone were shaking slightly, and his breathing was coming back to something that sounded less like a battle, and more like a body remembering how to simply be. I kept my hand on his back. The black blood was still moving. I could feel it, feel the witness using it as a channel, Feel the weight of divine memory pressing through the wound in my shoulder and out through my palm and into him. Not as an invasion but as a reinforcement, the way light reinforces a room, the way water reinforces thirst. Cale turned his head. His golden eyes found me. They were still luminous, still inhuman in their clarity, but behind the luminosity there was something entirely human. Something exhausted and undone and present in a way he had not been at any point in this night, present the way a person is present when they have just come very close to no longer existing. "Sarah," he said. My name in his mouth was barely a sound. "I have you," I said. It was such a simple thing. 3 words, present tense. Nothing promised beyond the immediate moment. But his eyes closed when I said it. Briefly. Completely. The way a person closes their eyes when they have been holding something very heavy for a very long time and someone has finally taken the weight. The witness held the ridge for another 7 minutes. Counted. In those 7 minutes, what it remembered moved through the forest and the pack bonds and the old channels of supernatural communication like water moving through cracks in stone, finding every space available to it, filling them. The Ashen Court's history did not merely collapse. It was replaced. Replaced by what had actually happened 300 years ago, on a night very much like this one. The actual terms of the actual bargain, the actual words, the actual moment when the people who would become the Ashen Court had chosen power over truth and built an entire world on the architecture of that choice. Every wolf with old enough blood felt it. Every practitioner. Every supernatural creature within 40 miles who had believed, even peripherally, in the narrative the Ashen Court had constructed, felt it replaced by the truth. By the memory of a being that had been present at the original moment and had perfect, absolute, eternal recollection of every word. When the witness withdrew, it went slowly. It had no reason to rush. It had done what it came to do. It had witnessed. It pulled back through the door in my shoulder, and as it went, the black smoke thinned and the amber light in the granite dimmed, and the column of dark light fell back into me. Back into the coiled place behind my sternum, but it fell back differently. Not smaller, not larger, but settled. The way something settles when it has finally been used for the purpose it was made for. The door in my shoulder closed. Not all the way. Never all the way, not after this. Not after what Cale's claws had opened and the witness had walked through. But enough. Enough that it was a door and not a wound. A threshold and not a tear. Something that could be opened from the inside with intention, rather than torn open from the outside with violence. The blood stopped flowing. The smoke stopped rising. My shoulder was silent. I became aware slowly of how cold I was. How exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that lives beyond the body, that involves not just muscles and blood and bone but the deeper architecture, the foundational stuff, the parts of a person that do not show up on any anatomical diagram but are nonetheless the load-bearing structures of being alive. My legs gave out. Not dramatically. They simply stopped holding me, quietly and without warning. The way things stop when they have given everything available to give and there is simply nothing left. I sat down on the granite ridge. The warm stone received me. Cale was beside me before I finished falling. Not catching me. I did not need catching. But beside me. Close enough that his arm was against mine. His warmth enormous and immediate in the cold night air. And he sat down on the ridge next to me with the deliberateness of a person who has decided exactly where they are going to be and has no intention of reconsidering it. We sat. Below us, the forest was quiet in the specific way it is quiet after something enormous has passed through it. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of aftermath, of settling, of a world that has just been rearranged, taking a moment to understand its new configuration. Marin's voice drifted up from the tree line. She was issuing instructions to her wolves, calm and precise. The voice of a woman who has survived catastrophe before and knows that the administrative work begins immediately after. The Ashen Court's wolves were gone. The practitioners were gone. Whatever remained of the ashen court itself would spend the next years, possibly decades, dissolving under the weight of what the witness had released into the world tonight. A truth that large does not retract, only spreads. Is it over? Kel said. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the forest below, at the moonlight on the pine tops, at the distant glow of the outpost fire finally burning down to coals. This part, I said. He absorbed this. What comes next, he said. More, I said. The witness was the first. Now that the door exists as a door rather than a wound, the others can follow. When they choose to. In their own time. In their own way. The gods do not hurry. I have noticed, he said quietly, that neither do you. I looked at him. His profile in the moonlight was very still. The exhaustion in him was visible now, not as weakness, but as the honest aftermath of a being who had been remade in the course of a single night, who had arrived in this forest as one thing and was sitting on this ridge as something that did not yet have a name. Kale, I said. He turned to look at me. His golden eyes were not luminous anymore. They were simply eyes. Tired and present and seeing me with a directness that had nothing predatory in it, which was possibly the most extraordinary thing he had done all night. What the practitioner was doing to you, I said. When the frost was spreading. I know what she was doing, he said. Were you afraid? Said. He was quiet for a moment. Long enough that I thought he would not answer. Not of dying, he said finally. Then of what? Said. He looked at me for a long time. The moonlight sat between us. The warm granite held us both. Of not being here when you needed me to be, he said. The words landed somewhere very quiet inside me. In the place that had been coiled and careful and alone for 17 years. In the place that had kept itself sealed as carefully as the door in my shoulder, for the same reason the door had been sealed. Because some things once opened cannot be closed again, and a person has to be certain before they allow that kind of permanent alteration. I was certain. I reached over and put my hand in his. Not the blood-covered one. Clean one. He looked down at it. His large hand, scarred and warm and 3 centuries old, closed around mine with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something they understand to be extraordinary and do not want to mishandle. We sat on the ridge as the moon crossed the sky. Below us the forest resettled. Above us, the stars continued their ancient and indifferent burning. And in my shoulder, where the door lived now, permanent and quiet and mine, something on the other side leaned close to the threshold and simply rested there. Patient. Witnessed. Known. In the years that followed, they would tell many stories about that night. The wolves would tell the story of the Alpha King who knelt on the ridge, which was the story wolves always tell about the moment power meets something greater than itself. The practitioners would tell the story of the witness, which was the story of memory and reckoning and the long patience of truth. Marin would tell the true story, the complete one, the record she had been promised. And she would tell it accurately because she had been present for it, and because Marin Valdrin, for all her commerce and secrets, understood that some truths are too important to sell. But the story I am telling you, the one that matters, the one that will last longer than pack records or practitioner histories or the constructed mythologies of courts that no longer exist, is simpler than all of those. It is the story of a girl who was told her whole life that what lived inside her was a curse. Who was told to keep it small and quiet and sealed. Who was told that the thing she carried was too dangerous to open, too powerful to survive, too ancient to belong to someone like her. And who discovered, on a cold October night on a granite ridge above a forest full of wolves and gods and the wreckage of 3 centuries of deliberate lies, that the difference between a curse and a blessing is not in the nature of the thing itself. It is in whether you are afraid of it. She was not afraid of it anymore. And the gods, who had been waiting with the particular patience of beings who exist outside of time, who had pressed against the door for 3 centuries without panic or urgency or despair, simply because they knew they had always known that the right blood would come. The gods at last came home. They say that on certain nights in October, when the moon is very large and very cold, you can find warm stone on the granite ridge above the northern forest. They say the stone is warm in the way living things are warm, from the inside outward. They say if you press your bare hand to it and close your eyes and stop being afraid of what you carry, you can feel something on the other side press back. Patient, present, waiting for you to open the door.